presentation. Please, I appreciate you all being on. We've got a lot of information to go over, and I ask that hold your questions. You can type them if you're in Skype. You can type them to the left, and then Connie will help to read those at the end when it's time to read to have a Q&A portion. And the presenters are limited to 5 minutes, up to 7 minutes. Once we're done with the presentations, which that'll be close to around 11 o'clock, we will move into the Q&A, and then each question and interaction needs to be limited to 5 minutes. We want to make sure to get through all the questions possible. This is being recorded, so we will have a link available at the end. Let me start presenting, and so we can get into it. I appreciate, again, please make sure that you're on mute, because if not, then it's going to disrupt our conversation with each other. Thanks. 1 second here.
Juan Watson.
Jeff, can I remind people to put their phones on mute, because if they come off of mute, it will capture their phone in the recording.
Right. Connie, if you could, mention that as needed. I'm not going to be able to get at it readily enough. I appreciate it. Thanks. Okay. Can you see my screen all right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Connie, can you get a hold of Bob? He's trying to contact me.
Adamson?
Yes. Thanks. Thanks. All right. All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for participating and joining us. We've had a lot of questions come up, and when I say we, I'm part of a group that I helped to put together called Healthcare Circle of Excellence, which is a group of healthcare business professionals. And we've got very qualified individuals that are leaders within their industry to help us to work together to advise our doctors, predominantly our medical area as well as the dental area. And we work together a lot in helping each other's clients to be secure and financially successful. So a lot of the questions came up today about giving clarity on many things related to COVID, around potential liabilities, current liabilities, future liabilities, what are best practices, and a lot of people getting conflicting information or no information. So we put today's meeting together in the sense of helping to get questions answered and just helping everybody to just make it through today's times basically to survive and thrive. And that is our goal, working together. Somebody's not on mute, so can you please make sure you're on mute? I appreciate it. So Clay, that might be you, I'm not sure. So today's panelists, and it'll be this order, legal will be Greg Chairs. Greg is our healthcare attorney. He typically represents the medical side. His partner, Rich, represents the dental side. Rich is off on vacation, so Greg is here to kind of represent the legal aspect that would impact both medical and dental side. Human resources is Wendy Sellers. Insurances will be Bob Adamson. Financial, we've got CPAs from both sides. Scott is on the medical side, and we'll be talking about as far as what most of the physicians are seeing as far as to say concerns around the financial aspects that are related. It could be around PPP or even to say other related sources of revenue to make up for lost revenue and needed working capital. And then Peter as well, he's on the dental side and dental specifics. So Peter will go over as far as the dental specific, what would be those things that a dentist needs to be aware of, and making sure again to get some clarity there. For public relations, really the marketing area, Melissa will be going over to say, what does marketing even have to deal with anything as far as to say, why should that even be a concern? And there's some great things that she's going to point out that we all need to be aware of. And then at the end, then to wrap it all up, will be Tony talking about PPE and clean criteria. Kind of, where's it at today? What is some clarity there? There's so much conflict, especially in the dental side, around who's right, who's wrong, what are the right standards, what's coming up, and helping to give some clarity there, and some great information, especially from the federal level that Tony's tied in that he can share. So here's the agenda and format. Introducing myself, I apologize. I am the host, again, Jeff Holt. I'm the team lead for the Healthcare Circle of Excellence. I'm also a senior healthcare business banking advisor with PNC Bank. And that's my tie-in as far as why I care and getting help from my healthcare clients and working with a great group like this. And especially putting today's format together to help get them answers as well. From 10:10 to 11 o'clock, the panelists will have, again, 5 to 7 minutes, and we're going to have to be very adamant on the timing of that, just because we want to make sure that we get to the Q&A part. And again, the Q&A part, we figure about 50 minutes for that. We've got to limit everybody's interaction to 5 minutes. Again, just to make sure we have enough time to get through as many questions as possible. And then there will be the wrap up. I'll send you, I'll have information there available for everyone to view of, if there wasn't a question asked, if there wasn't a question that was properly answered, then you can contact me and I'll get you that information. Or if you want to have a copy of the replay, this is actually being recorded, and we'll get you a link to the YouTube replay just so you can revisit the information and actually share it to those that may find value in it. Okay, so we're going to move on, and actually going to start just a couple of minutes earlier to our first speaker. So Greg Chairs is our healthcare attorney, and I'm going to start with Greg, and Greg's going to take it from here for the next up to 7 minutes. Greg?
I have been forewarned, 7 minutes or less or else. And I guess you'll kind of move through this. That's a little bit about me for people who look at the slides. Thanks for having me today. And it's been interesting. I primarily represent physician practices. I do work with dentists and do transactional work for them. But largely, it was the physician side that has reached out to us, but probably not nearly as much as you might would have you would think now. More of it is on the HR labor side, and that's hitting different kinds of folks than what we do. But I put together some slides. They're not necessarily as aesthetic or as pretty as some of the other ones that you had. They're intended to be informational, and they're kind of muses. They're my thoughts about certain things, and what we might see and what we might hear. So I kind of, we'll switch to, past this slide, Jeff, to the first one on liability. We still have to figure out what liability is going to be for these things. But if and when we counsel our clients, and what I tell them all the time is, look, the one thing that you have to do is follow CDC guidelines. You got to follow other governmental guidelines, OSHA guidelines, state, whatever the local county governments say. There are a lot of irons in the fire. There are a lot of inconsistencies that have come out of Washington, that have come out of the state, that have come out of local counties about what to do. And where you are in the county, you need to peel all that down and try to follow it to the best that you can. And so when we look at where there's going to be potential liability later on, it's simply going to be somebody's failure to take the precautionary steps to protect people that come to their business or protect their employees, from things that can happen. And those steps and those guidelines, and Wendy's going to cover a lot of that, but I mean, the CD guidelines, which change every day, are going to be things that people need to follow. So I kind of gave a list of like 5 areas where I think there may be some exposure for providers. It didn't generally come from me. It's come from looking at different articles. People have pontificated a lot on this. And I thought, you'll see them real quickly here. Like, number 1, failure to perform elective surgeries. So we put a moratorium on elective surgeries. This is where I got the most calls. This is where I got calls from all the providers who said, how do I get around this? How do I see patients? What's elective? What's not elective? Who can I see? That was their issue about money and patients and access and how long it was going to take. And their whole premise was, I have enough PPE, that's why they put this in place, I should be able to see patients. I will tell you that the Agency for Healthcare Administration and the Department of Health walked into a lot of offices and filed cease and desist orders with providers that were violating this, that were doing certain things. But one of the issues might be that statute said you can't do elective surgeries unless it was a life-threatening or would cause permanent impairment or other issues. There may be some fights later on if that happens, that a doctor should have gone around that law because they caused a life-threatening or a permanent impairment or someone passed away because of it. So you see another one. You got providers in hospitals that are practicing beyond the scope of where their training is. Merely an access need. There will be arguments later that will be that they were doing that to assist and on a voluntary basis, and there'll be laws that may protect them. There may be cases over, PPE shortages, rationing, who it gets done, delaying treatment for we're going to treat the COVID folks versus the other things we're going to wait. And you may see some arguments over inadequate testing and delays. We've had COVID come through our office with employees, and we have some folks who haven't gotten results back in 18, 19 days, which of course creates issues when you're trying to deal with social distancing and quarantines and what have you. So those are going to be kind of the issues that are going to apply no matter what the provider is, whether it's elective for a dentist or it's elective for a physician, whether there's a permanent injury or damage. You'll see where the plaintiff's attorneys may get creative a little later. Next slide, so I can stay on time. The next one on the next slide is really just preparing for care of patients. A lot of people are already back. These are some of the guidelines that existed, but these are, some things that you look at. Make sure that you have policies and procedures in place, and make sure that you follow them. What do you do about staff? What do you do about the people that come in? How do you address when there is a positive COVID test by employees who may have seen patients? How do you deal with the fact that you have a patient that's been in your waiting room for 30 or 40 minutes and then test on a rapid test positive? What do you do for the other folks that are there? What do you do with the other providers? The carriers have put out, I mentioned them, a couple of carriers and others perhaps, on the first bullet point up there, have really put out some interesting guidance. They're the folks that are looking at some of the liability claims. They are looking to mitigate those, so they've put out some guidance. And Mag Mutual and the Doctors Company, for example, have put together some kind of comprehensive checklists that are good at least to look at, see how they may or may not apply. And then you get together with somebody like Wendy and Bob and some of the other folks to see how it may fit into certain protections for your practice. So let's go to the next one, Jeff. This is lawsuit concerns. This is where everybody worries about where everything's going to happen. And it's interesting because there's a lot of litigation that's going on right now, but it's not very much personal injury. So there's been a push in Florida to create business protection for folks as it relates to COVID. I'm not aware that anything has happened yet. There are other states, and I've listed a few here, that have passed some limited form of protection: Utah, Georgia, North Carolina, and Oklahoma. There's a big fight, obviously, with some of the stimulus bills, particularly in the House of Representatives, about whether it will be carte blanche, how it will be limited, what kind of protection they will afford. Time will tell what those places are, but ultimately they will be case specific, and there will be an access to courts argument about any kind of litigation that's brought. And so you're going to look at different places, for example, like on the fourth bullet point, or nursing homes is a different place. Will they be treated differently, say, than a physician or dental office? They have certain obligations to people that stay there, and certain personnel and certain policies. Physicians have certain things that they can do. So I looked for articles to kind of find out, well, what's going on out there, because I don't monitor what's being filed at the courthouse. And Politico had an article last week, whether you follow their political ideology or not, that said basically there were over 3,700 current lawsuits over COVID that were around the country, but they calculated less than 5% as of now were personal injury claims. The bulk of them were civil rights claims. They were insurance claims. And there's a law firm called Hunton, Andrew, and Kurth. You'll see down at the bottom, and they have a litigation tracker that you can look. And this is, that's my disclaimer. That's where I got this information. They have an ability for you to click over any state in the United States. So there'll be a picture of the map, and you can click over, and it has a breakdown of the different types of cases. So you've got cases for civil rights, a lot of stay-at-home orders, essential versus non-essential designations, people fighting those when they first came out. Then consumer cases for failure to pay back money. There's been obviously a lot of lawsuits against institutions, educational institutions. They wanted money back. They wanted housing money back. They want tuition money back. There are contracts over or fights and disputes over wages and wrongful termination. Those will happen. There will be fights over misuse of PPE money, as we've seen the articles lately where people have bought Lamborghinis and boats and what have you. There's going to be some stuff that goes to that. And then there's obviously the lease moratorium, which is fine, but when that lease moratorium, which the governor extended yesterday, comes done, there will be a slew of lawsuits where landlords are going to be suing tenants for failure to pay. And so that'll all be done. The personal injury cases are coming. I just think that there's too much guidance that continues to move that may make it a little difficult for them to claim where that standard of care was just yet. So let's go to the next two slides, and I'll do them in just 2 seconds. Employees are going to be able to claims. Bob can address this. You're going to see workers' comp claims, MFL, contract issues, wrongful death, exposure at work, PPP loan stuff, CDC. You may see some whistleblower stuff that'll go there. And then lastly, the last slide, just for time, is liability waivers. And where you're seeing these is people like me who have high schoolers, where high schools are sending out these waivers saying, we want to waive you from ever doing anything for any reason against us. We're not responsible for anything that happens as it relates to any COVID that your child may get or any flow of damages that may come from that. There's going to be a lot of litigation over that, whether it's a contract of adhesion or not. Kids have to go to school. I think there's going to be courts that are going to really...
Hey, Jeff, you may have just muted Greg Chairs. We can't hear him.
No, I didn't do anything, so.
Somebody muted me. I didn't touch anything, so I'm back.
Okay.
So if I saw that my button got muted with my hands here. So I just basically was talking about liability waivers, and I think there's going to be a lot of challenges to them and some difficulties in enforcing those. Is either contracts of adhesion or against public policy or access to the court issues. So. Okay. I'm sure I passed my 7 minutes. That's just a brief thing of those slides that I had, Jeff.
Right. Thanks so much, Greg. It's some great information. Again, at the end, everyone's going to have questions to ask Greg and others the questions. So we'll move on. Thanks so much, Greg. It's some great
if you don't mind, you couldn't hand it over to me to mute because I'm not a presenter, but Melissa Wing is, and she is offering to mute people as needed. And so if you can just click on her and change to make her, is it to make you a host, Melissa? Because she already is a speaker,
yeah.
But anyhow, she'll help with that.
I can go through and I can mute people as they come on, just to keep the background noise down.
Thank you.
But I have to be the host, or a host.
Sorry, let's. Can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So.
Click on the PowerPoint.
Okay. Just want to make sure. All right. Let's move on. Okay. So our next presenter is Wendy Sellers. Wendy is known as the HR lady and has some fantastic information to go over today. So Wendy, you have 7 minutes at the maximum. So Thank you.
Great, it shouldn't take that long.
We can barely, Wendy, we can barely hear you.
Okay, let me put some headphones in here then. Hold on. Can you hear me now?
A little bit, but still it's not that loud.
Can you hear me now?
That's much better, thanks.
Okay, sounds good. So again, I'm Wendy Sellers. I'm the HR lady, and I have been sharing a lot of information on LinkedIn regarding COVID in the workplace. And so obviously it has been changing by the day of what we need to do. And so I encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn because I've been sharing information there. All the social medias, but LinkedIn's the main source. So there are primary COVID-related impacts in the workplace. Somebody's not on mute and it's very loud, but I'm just going to keep talking louder. So as the CDC keeps updating and changing paths, so to speak, so do the recommendation on how to handle COVID in the workplace. So, you know, what you thought you knew in March or April or even last week has been updated. So if you are not getting CDC information emailed to you, you could go on their website, it's free, and you can get their information emailed to you. I encourage you to do so because it is changing almost every day. As of 7/26, and actually last night something came out too, but as of 7/26, this information came out. So this was something different than the day before. So there, actually, if you, the link below, which I will share on LinkedIn today, reshare on LinkedIn, will take you here. But there are actually 3 new recommendations from the CDC saying that if your employee, for example, thinks that they have COVID or know that they have it, say because they were in contact with somebody in their household or wherever else, and they have symptoms, that they need to be quarantined for 10 days. So how does that affect you? Well, if you're a small business under 500 employees, if you're a healthcare provider or not, which we'll get to in a minute, you need to remove them from the workplace, and you may need to pay them as well. And so the symptoms issue has changed. And then there's another step from the CDC. So you've tested positive because you're getting tested for whatever reason, but you have no symptoms. So that's something totally different. You can ask your employees or mandate your employees to get negative tests, two sets of tests, 24 hours apart. So if you are doing that, the problem that we're having is where do they get these tests? And that's the information that you're going to have to find. And it is different, you know, every single day. There's tests in parking lots, there's tests at the emergency room, there's tests at doctors, but many of the tests are taking 10 to 14 days to come back, which means your employees may have already run past the FFCRA money, which is the Family's First Coronavirus Response money, if you as a healthcare provider have even said that you're going to give it to them. So if you could forward to the next slide. So what I want you to consider also is, well, previous to today, which is the last day of July, and where unemployment in the state of Florida and in many states runs out, the extra unemployment runs out. You could also, you know, put people on furlough if you don't have work, and so that they're getting money elsewhere because they're going to run out of FFCRA money if they actually have COVID in a case that goes a long time. The issue is today, July 31st, the CARES Act runs out of unemployment money. We're going to hope that Congress gets their act together and actually cares about the citizens of the United States. But as of today, they don't seem to be getting their act together, and they're still fighting over control. So in Florida, actually ended last week. But if you have anybody who's still on unemployment, they're going back down to the $275 a week, and that's only $275 a week if they qualify. It may be less. So we'll see what's going to come out of here. I know there's going to be something, but it's probably going to be as low as $200 a week, which will be the $275 plus $200. And as you know, that is not enough to pay the bills. I want to have you look at this second bullet point here where I have a star after $600 a week, which is $15 an hour. What I predict is going to come out of this is people are going to continue to fight for $15 an hour as the minimum wage because they gave everybody $600 a week, which is $15 an hour for unemployment. And as you know, most lower wage people in Florida do not make $15 an hour. So we're going to have some issues that come out. Now, the good thing that did come out this week in Florida is the DEO did extend the search requirements or the lack of search requirements for unemployment. So it's not as complicated to get the unemployment money, but unfortunately, there's really no unemployment money left except for the regular amount. Okay, if you could forward to the next screen. I mentioned this Families First Act real quick. I think everybody on the call knows as a healthcare provider, you are exempt. However, you can choose to say, yes, I'm going to give my employees the FFCRA money. And then you could also choose as a healthcare provider to say which reasons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 actually isn't defined yet. So if you want it, I'll share this link on LinkedIn today. It's question number 56 from the Department of Labor that actually says that you can pick and choose as a healthcare provider. I'll move forward. I think we have one more slide. And so the future impacts, again, what I would like you to consider with your clients is childcare. So maybe you can have a childcare room at your office with Wi-Fi for them to bring their children. I don't know what's going to happen here, but there, a lot of people are working from home and they're going to want to continue doing that if they're able to do that. So with that said, last slide, contact me. If you have any information or any questions whatsoever, I'm not going to charge you. I have a lot of things already shared that I can just shoot you an email and get you the answer very quickly. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thank you very much. That's great. That's a great profile pic as well. As you're prepared to fight for your clients, so that's how I view it. So all right. Well, thank you so much, Wendy. That was some great information as always. Our next presenter is Bob Adamson. Bob is our insurance partner, and he deals with all levels of the types of insurances. And think about in today's times to say, as a business owner, just the different type of insurances that you have. Or maybe to say even maybe the different type of insurances that now maybe exist or will exist that haven't previously existed because of COVID. So I want to introduce Bob and have Bob take it from here for this next part. Bob?
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. Bob Adamson here from Lumber Risk Advisors. And today I'm going to keep the topics real simple. There's a lot of information in the several slides I got here, but I'm going to really break down to some of my concern areas. So I may not go through really all the information you're seeing in those slides just because they're so detailed, but they're very informational, and I really encourage everyone on here to really read those and understand those because I think sometimes there's some misconceptions in some of the coverages we're going to talk about. So I'm going to hop right in. I'm actually going to put myself on my 7-minute timer, so I am in compliance here. So right. So here we go. The first one I want to touch on is workers' compensation. Specifically, I want to talk to some what I call the very small practices, solo practices, and sometimes small healthcare facilities like maybe a smaller size imaging center or a lab, something like that. One of the problems I see out there from time to time is I go in, I meet with these folks, I go and meet with their business partners or their office manager, or sometimes the owner themselves, and I ask about workers' compensation coverage. And I say, I don't see a poster up, I don't see any coverage. They tell me I don't need it. And I say, okay, well, how many employees do you have? And they'll go through the employee count. And I said, well, here's how the statute reads. In the state of Florida, you should have workers' compensation if you have 4 or more employees, and it does not matter whether they are full-time or part-time. Now, the owner can exempt themselves and reduce that count, okay? Understand what I'm saying? So if the owner reduces himself, they say, okay, well, I only have 3 employees. Okay, that's right. By mandate and statute, you're not required to have it. But what it does not do, it does not waive your responsibility that if your employee either catches a disease on the premise, gets injured on the premise, whether it's a needle stick or a patient lifting injury, you're not waived from that responsibility. You will have to take care of their medical bills So most likely, if they're not buying workers' compensation, I can almost bet that they don't have group medical coverage. So therein lies a serious financial decision for the business. And it also doesn't waive their right for lost wages if they're out on medical and missed time for pay. So workers' compensation in the healthcare arena all falls under, if it's not a hospital, let me qualify that, for medical practices, imaging centers, labs, things like that of that nature, ophthalmology practices, dental practices, all fall under code 8832, which is physicians clerical. The rate in the state of Florida is 34 cents per every $100 of payroll. This is a coverage that medical practices cannot afford not to have. So that's why you saw in the parentheses there, I put in there, not a time to be penny wise and pound foolish. Absolutely buy workers' compensation insurance. This is a first line of protection, and really it's a big mystery of how the COVID comes to play into this. For many types of businesses, workers' compensation carriers are going to fight the topic of how did this employee get sick with COVID? How do you all know he or she caught it at work? And you're right, it may be a hard thing to accurately prove, but when it comes into the medical field, it's not going to be so hard to prove, because if they're having sick patients come in and let's face it, some of the staff, these MAs, nurses, they may know and remember the name of the sick patient who was diagnosed with it. I think it's a very high likelihood that we could see workers' compensation having to cover any and all of these COVID cases that come in through medical practices. So practices need to absolutely have workers' compensation insurance. Very affordable. The second one, and it kind of ties into what Wendy's talking about, what we're seeing this right now. We're already seeing litigation starting. The next line of coverage is employment practice liability insurance. This is almost a must-have insurance anymore, especially in this situation with the COVID situation, because hard decisions have either happened or are getting ready to happen, of having to furlough employees, maybe having to let go of employees just altogether. I don't know each company's situation, but then you get into a situation, well, okay, you let me go, but I notice you let this person stay. I think I'm more qualified, or I may have had more time there, or maybe I had more time but less qualifications and that person got to stay. Now we're into an employment practice law situation. I felt like I was wrongfully terminated. You may have discriminated against me. You may have been age biased because you felt like I was older, so you let me go because you thought I had a higher chance of catching COVID. I mean, there's just an absolute plethora. Wendy can tell you, and probably Greg Chairs can even speak on it too, that in the world of employment practice situation, nobody knows anyone's threshold of what is going to be their triggering mechanism to upset them or to have them go seek out an attorney for advice and counsel against an employer. So employment practice liability, I love to throw a price range out for this type of coverage for medical practices. On average, we've seen the price ranges range anywhere from $3,200 a year for this policy to as much as $4,500, depending on the size of the practice. But on average, I probably see $3,500 a year. I will tell you all, in my professional opinion of 25 years of doing this, it is the best retainer and first line of defense and a resource for human resources, employment law attorneys to be able to go to, as well as advice on how to handle a situation on some of the hotlines they provide. Employment practice liability insurance, I would say, is absolutely, in this day and time, a must coverage, even for the smallest of practices. And lastly, I want to talk on medical professional liability. This is an area I probably have my most broadest knowledge in. I will tell you, medical professional liability, the great news is a lot of the carriers for years were not ready to embrace telemedicine. That's completely off the table. They're loving telemedicine. They're liking how the doctors are able to stay in constant contact with their patients, the ease of contact. I think a lot of the fears that the medical malpractice carriers had have started to dissipate. So you can do the telemedicine. If you're not doing telemedicine, you need to be doing it now. I think the next item I had on there was curbside medicine. You'll see that. And believe it or not, we have some practices. We have urgent care centers setting up daily outside urgent cares, especially some of the pediatric urgent cares. We're seeing this. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but at first it started out with the COVID testing they were just doing outside. Well, now we're seeing pediatric practices. We're seeing urgent care practices take advantage of this. And then, of course, when I say curbside, that means like literally right outside the very front of their building where they are doing some of this. That is something, if you rent or lease a location, that's probably something you're going to need to speak to the owner of the property, the landlord, to see if that is allowable in your lease contract. So that is something you probably want to start with a conversation there. A quick brief update on medical malpractice in the state of Florida. The 2003 tort reform law that was passed in 2003 has gone out the window. 2018, there was a situation in the Florida Supreme Court at the time that overturned the Florida tort reform law of 2003. And since that time, the number of lawsuits filed against physicians and surgeons in the state of Florida has absolutely jumped exponentially. That is immediately causing more litigation, pricing, and costs to medical malpractice insurance companies. And what we are seeing is not any just a couple, but almost all the med mal insurers in the state of Florida are all filing for rate increases. They're filing for major rate increases on the separate corporation limit coverage, and what I call single-digit rate increases on physician and surgeon rates. But we are seeing the rates go up. We are seeing scheduled credits being taken away. We are seeing tightening of underwriting guidelines. And at the end of the day, this means that we're seeing costs rising across the board on all specialties. So just a heads up on that. That is what's coming down the pike. So I appreciate you all allowing me the opportunity to be here today. So that's my slides, and my contact information is on there if you need to reach out to me individually.
All right. Thanks a lot, Bob. Appreciate the information. And again, Bob has a lot of information as I'm kind of panning up just to show you that we will be able to get the slides and the replay out to everyone so that they can look more at the information, which is very, very helpful. So thank you so much, Bob. Our next speaker is our medical CPA, Scott. Scott's a great advisor and very specialized in the medical industry. And Scott, I'm going to allow you to take it from here. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeff, and thanks again for inviting me on this panel today. So you'll see my profile there, my background. Our firm, MSL, as well as MSL SafeSource, does a lot in all the spectrums of long-term care, senior housing, medical practices, you name it. So if you want to switch to the next slide. So a couple of things that we think are important to remind people. The first being review of internal controls with the new normal in mind. What we really think is a lot of healthcare practices have had to dramatically change their operations. Frequently, roles within the practices have changed, new procedures. Certainly, almost every medical practice has had new procedures just with respect to infection control. But we also see some practices doing more scrutiny on costs. So with these changes, there's opportunities for breakdowns in internal control to either be shortcut, to be circumvented. So as practice owners, we think it makes a lot of sense to keep that in mind and again, look at your segregation of duties, look at the processes you have in place to make sure you don't, with the new normal in mind, they don't have potential breakdowns that might occur. And not that me and Bob planned this, but the second bullet point talking about telemedicine practices, we think that obviously there's been an explosion of that. I was on a panel discussion a week or so ago, and one of the presenters talked about how 2020 is now the new 2025 because of all the things that providers have had to do, which really would have occurred probably 5 years from now, has now shifted the technology curve to today. So again, you're seeing a lot a lot of telehealth. So we're reminding people to make sure it's in compliance and you're using proper coding. CMS back in 2018 did a small study of 100 claims, and of those 100 claims, 69 of them were good, but 31 did not meet the requirements. So what that tells me is there was issues back in 2018, and the OIG is aware of it. As a result, I expect increased scrutiny in this area. So again, reminding people, make sure you're getting your coding correct with your telemedicine. And the last bullet point in this slide is adequacy of infection control practices. I think we've already heard from Wendy and others talking about how important it is. So certainly others on this panel can speak in much greater detail, but certainly there needs to be a plan in place when and if your practice has a COVID case, so you're able to adjust your practices. Next slide. So a couple other things about make sure you ensure you have an adequate system to track your additional costs. Is sick time being handled properly in compliance with the laws? Make sure there's no double dipping of costs. And what I mean by that is we have a number of healthcare practices that have gotten PPP loans that have had some form of provider relief funds coming through. And so you definitely need to have a process where you're tracking those costs and making sure that costs you're using to satisfy the provider relief funds is not also being used as part of your calculation for your PPP loan forgiveness. Again, having that system in place now, because the longer you wait, the worse it's going to get. Understanding patient volumes and demographics. We've certainly seen some change in the payer mix for some of them. Obviously, there's an increasing number of people who have lost their insurance company coverage due to unemployment. So we're seeing increases in self-pay, some uninsured patients. So the thing we're telling our clients is, make sure you're monitoring your accounts receivable. You need to focus on timely and accurate billing. Make sure accounts receivable collections is occurring to maximize cash. Again, keeping your eye on the ball, because with any sort of billing issues, especially in the third-party payer systems, the more you get behind, the worse it's going to be. And kind of last on this in PP loan forgiveness. So I've probably sat on 15 different webinars related to that, and we continue to hear a lot of concern. I'm not going to talk a lot about that because our next presenter has a number of points to talk about that. The thing I'm trying to tell clients is relax. I expect, based on the extension to 24 weeks, if you go that route, you should have enough payroll to cover it. Even if you have a reduction FTE, your numerator in it, even with the FTE quotient adjustment, you should still qualify for full forgiveness. So again, we're telling people, relax. With related to that, and again, we have time. Banks aren't even in a position yet even to accept loan forgiveness applications, and that's not because of the banks. That's because of the SBA.
Hey, right. So I can vouch for that. So.
Yes, and it's been a constantly changing, and I'm sure Peter's going to talk about this, but it's been a constantly changing, like everything that's been occurring. Obviously, you have the CDC constantly changing, you have the SBA constantly changing, and also we've had 3 waves of pandemic relief, with the 4th one to be determined. So some of the best practices, one, address your documentation and internal control now. Again, make sure you're separating costs to track your COVID-19 costs. We think that's very, very important. Again, as I mentioned before, no double dipping. Make sure double dipping is not occurring, and consider segregation of duties. That's at the heart of any internal control system, is having a good segregation of duties. Go through your loan forgiveness calculation. Again, not a huge rush. You have time. We do expect additional guidance from the U.S. Treasury. Congress continues to debate changes and extensions to the program. And then remember to consider and plan for tax consequences. Right now, there's a tax effect. They haven't forgiven that, so there will be a significant tax effect, and it's better that you keep that in mind. The one other thing that's not on this slide that we've been telling our employees as well as all our clients is, remember and consider mental health for yourself and your staff. No doubt we are in unusual and stressful times. Make sure you're alert for changes in behavior and proactive in understanding the resources available. Many employers have EAPs. Make sure you understand what your employee assistance programs are, because again, we want to make sure that people, under these stressful times, we want to make sure people keep mental health top of mind. And then next slide with talking a little bit about 2020 and beyond. And I think we've already heard some of this, which is, again, we think a lot of these changes are going to be permanent. Certainly the telehealth definitely is going to be permanent. The good news about 2021 is the best news is we'll be outside of a presidential election cycle, so some of the craziness will be a little less in 2021. Again, we definitely expect increased demand for telehealth services. So you got to look at, you have the technology resources to continue this model. We've already heard that Congress and the Florida legislature are certainly debating provisions. There are provisions in the HEALS Act containing liability protections. I am optimistic, but who knows? If you look at the Congress, of the 537 members of Congress, 192 of them are in the law profession. So blocking the ability for claims may not be too popular. And the last one, bullet point, which I think is very, very important, is, and we've told this to numerous clients, is remember, governmental scrutiny will occur with 2020 hindsight, meaning money is flowing now, people are dealing with the pandemic, but you fast forward a couple of years from now, certainly the governmental scrutiny is going to be, we think, intense. So again, you want to have all your ducks in a row, your documentation to support your PPP loan forgiveness and anything else for that matter, because again, right now we're in a different time, but once we get past this pandemic, we'll be in a much better place, but we'll also have the scrutiny of the government coming at everybody. And of course, as a firm, we're always here to help.
Great. Some fantastic information, Scott. Again, just all very timely, and what a lot of my doctors ask and wanting clarity. So thank you so much for the details. Our next presenter on the dental side is Peter. Peter is our dental CPA / advisor, and Peter's going to go over some adjacent information from what Scott covered, and so to help to make it more holistic overall, but also something to say more, some things that be more specific on the dental side. Peter?
Hey, good morning, everyone. So if you want to go to the next slide, Jeff. Kind of today I want to cover three things. We'll go through the PPP program, a little bit on the stimulus payments from the Department of Health and Human Services, more specific to dentists, and then the economic injury disaster loans, which many of your clients may have received or applied for. If we can go to the next slide. So on the PPP loans, we were concerned when they were originally issued back in April and May that you had an 8-week window to spend money. And for many practices that we worked with, they were either not open or not back at full strength. Now that there's a 24-week window to qualify for paying wages, we're finding it's much easier to get full forgiveness. The difficulty hasn't been for our clients in terms of spending cash, but it's been the headcount. We think that the new changes have made the headcount a little easier to qualify for in terms of full-time employees. But we're also anticipating that there may be some PPP loan forgiveness changes as part of the stimulus that is working its way through Congress currently. An important note on headcount and expenditures is that you need to have appropriate documentation, particularly with some of the changes that have occurred saying that if someone is refusing to return to work, they don't count towards the headcount reduction. If someone is voluntarily resigns or is fired for cause, they don't count for reduction. Unfortunately, as Scott mentioned before, we started out with a set of rules that were fairly straightforward. And now we've gone to a lot of exceptions to rules and exceptions to rules. So there is a lot of confusion out there in terms of the forgiveness process. We are recommending to our clients that we wait on submitting applications for forgiveness. One is most of the banks are not ready. I don't know if the SBA is ready. And a final thing is I don't know if I would want to be the guinea pig who it takes 65 emails and 2 phone meetings to get a forgiveness application through because everyone is still trying to figure out the process and the rules. We think that probably most practices are going to qualify for full forgiveness. That may come at a cost, which Scott hinted at, that currently the PPP program, as the IRS has interpreted it, is that if your loan is forgiven, you are not allowed to deduct the cost paid with the loan under a theory that you can't get tax-free income and deduct the expenses paid with tax-free income. For most of our clients, if we're looking at a average PPP loan fee of, let's just say 100,000, because I can do the math real quick, we're looking at an addition to tax of $32,000 to $37,000 due on April 15th. We're finding that most practice owners are a little are not really anticipating this, and so we've reached out to our clients now to at least start the conversation of what we can do to minimize the tax. But we're anticipating it's going to be a very ugly February, March, and April for many practice owners if they're not aware. We can go to the next slide. On the HHS stimulus payments, we're on the 3rd round now. For dentists, they're eligible as long as they didn't participate in the Medicaid or CHIP program. It's generally up to 2% of 2019 collections. You do have to accept the Health and Human Services terms and conditions. That said, there was a concern for many of my dentists about balance billing, which you're not allowed to do under the terms for medical providers. However, the HHS came out on July 22nd and said that condition doesn't really apply to dentists unless you're specifically treating for a COVID symptom, which is generally not the case. That application to submit for funding is due on Monday. So most dentists are aware of it. But if you do happen to reach out to a dentist later today, you may want to remind them that they've got to get that application in by Monday. Next slide, please. Final one, and I'll go over this quickly, is the economic injury disaster loans. A lot of the practices we worked with applied for this back in March and April because at the time there was an offer of a $10,000 advance which did not have to be repaid. That advance has dropped to $1,000 per employee as of February 29th and has been funded. The loan is actually a very generous loan. It can be, typically we're seeing 30 years, 3.75% fixed. However, you are only allowed to use it on working capital. So it cannot be used to refinance your existing debt. It cannot be used to buy the vacation home. It cannot be used to refinance anything on the personal side. We can't commingle. So if you have money that is allocated for PPP, you can't spend EIDL on the same expense during the same time period. And essentially, the thing that we don't know anything about at this point is that the SBA has the right to audit how these loans are being used. We just don't know what that audit is going to look like at this point. I know of CPAs in Louisiana who are still going through some Hurricane Katrina EIDL loan audits. So these things can last for a long time. The best thing you can do is essentially keep good documentation and justify how you're spending money. The concern that we see is practices and their owners taking dividends and distributions out of the practice, and whether that would be a issue or a red flag under EIDL audits, because the EIDL loan says you cannot use funding for personal purposes. We like the EIDL as a backup plan. I think it provides an increase in liquidity. That said, I would be careful about how you're spending money, and I would not make radical changes in terms of making large distributions out of your practice if you've taken an EIDL. Again, unfortunately, we don't know what the auditing is going to look like or how intense it will be. But it wouldn't surprise me if, as the economy starts to recover, that the SBA starts being a little bit more aggressive about how the funds were used, especially if we find out that funds were used inappropriately in a larger scale. Jeff, I think that's the last slide I've got. Loan concerns, which I've addressed previously. Basically, keep records. Justify what you're doing, and understand that it's nice to get, for many practices, $150,000 or $200,000 deposited by the SBA, but it does come with some catches, and you have to be aware of the terms and conditions. Jeff, I think I'm out of time, and that's it.
Well, thank you. Great information, Peter. I'm sure it's going to help many that are watching to get some clarity and answers, and obviously many questions still to be answered. So thank you so much. All right, our next presenter is our marketing expert, Melissa. Melissa is going to talk about what does marketing and public relations have to do with today, and how was that impacted by COVID. So Melissa, take it from here.
Hi, everyone. You can go to the next screen. Okay, so there is a lot of confusion right now in the marketplace, and your message needs to be very clear. Even if someone goes to your website, they don't know if you're open or not. So it's very important. A lot of this is going to sound repetitive, but you never know where your patients are looking for messages about you. So it's best to just include your COVID message in anything and everything. So one, you need to create a COVID message. In that message, you need to include any new hours of operation, any safety precautions you're taking, any changes to your normal business as usual. And with that information, you need to update your website with a COVID message, either through a website pop-up or at the front page of your website in a different color than the rest of your message. If you don't have a website, now is the time to get one. Patients go online to get more information, and if they can't find you, they go on to someone else. So you need to be able to control your online message, and the best way to do that is through a website. Also, you need to post your COVID message on all of your social media platforms, and on Facebook in particular, you can pin your message to the top of your page. So as they're scrolling down, looking through your different posts, it's the very first one that they're going to see. And on top of that, on all of your social media pages where you put in the About Us section and your hours of operation, make sure that is also updated to your new COVID message. And a lot of different social media platforms have even more in-depth information, and just read over it and make sure it's all correct throughout the web. You need to update all of your online listing sites. If you don't know what an online listing site is, it's including Google, Yahoo, Bing, Yelp, but there's over 70 online listing sites that you can have information on. These sites do not update themselves. You have to go in and do it yourself. On most of these sites, there's a What's New section, and in that What's New section, you can put your COVID message. Also on these sites are the hours of operation. I know it's confusing. There are plenty of companies that will give you a list of the sites and what information is out there right now about you so that you can update it yourself. And there's also companies out there like mine that will update them all for you in one fell swoop. So no matter when your message changes, it's correct throughout the web. Also, if you've ever changed an address, a phone number, a physician, all of that information should be updated in all of your online listing sites. It's very important. You don't want to confuse your potential patients or your current patients. You want to make sure that whatever the message is, that it's correct and you know that they're getting the right information. Also, send out an email to all of your patients with the COVID message, and do this at least once every other month until things get back to whatever our new normal is. This is very important. They want to hear the message. With all of the confusion out there, even if they do go looking for you, they have a lot of questions. So if you could answer that in your COVID message, you'll get a lot less nuisance calls. Next slide. Another thing, this is something new. It's called ADA compliance. It's the Americans with Disabilities Act and was developed in 1990 and is meant to ensure that people with disabilities have the same opportunities as everyone else. So basically on your website, and make sure that it can increase the font size if someone can't read your font. It also will change colors of the website if someone is colorblind. It can also make it to where it has a voiceover and they can click on it. So if they are vision impaired, they will still be able to hear and dictate what's on your website. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people going out right now and they are purposely making sure that they sue you if you do not have your ADA compliance on your website. The icon at the top will typically be in the bottom right corner of your website if it is ADA compliant. If it's not, you should really look it up. If you just type in ADA compliant lawsuits, you'll see what I'm talking about, but it's becoming bigger and bigger, and more local businesses are being targeted for lawsuits. And guess what? They're winning. It's unfortunate that you have to go to these extremes, but especially in medical and dental, you need to make sure that your site is ADA compliant, and I can help with that. Next slide. And here's all of my contact information. You can reach me at any time. If you click on the website below, you can schedule an appointment. Thanks.
Great. Awesome. Great information, Melissa. Thank you so much for sharing. Appreciate it. So we're going to move on to our last panelist, is Tony. Tony has some great insight and connections at a very high level as we're all looking to say, what should we be doing to protect ourselves, our patients, our staff, and giving them the sense of security and peace of mind of coming into your facility and being as safe as possible, because obviously no one can be 100%, but to say, how can we be safe as possible, and what is proper PPE, and clearing up the confusion as far as to say, you know, who's saying what, who should be doing what. So with that, Tony, if you can take it from here. Tony, are you on mute?
Okay, there I go. It just said I'm no longer muted. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Can you get a little louder, possibly?
Yep. So I spent about 25 years developing ambulatory surgery centers and ensuring Joint Commission accreditation. And what that taught me was a lot about compliance and what it takes to implement that compliance. And what that led to was a phone call when this whole outbreak happened and the shutdown began about, could I design a compliance program to give confidence in re-entering the built space. Very long story short, I got connected with a person who was in two White House administrations, for Director of Standards and Measures, someone 30 years in the CDC, actually was the action response person when anthrax was released. And I have been deeply connected into all of the government agencies as we begin to forge a bridge to get criteria developed that can address the built space. So if you go to the next slide, Jeff, who's right and who's helping, the conflict between organizations around proper PPE and clean protocols. One of the things COVID broke was our government's ability to stovepipe agencies. So the CDC would work with, but not really communicate with the FDA. How our government agencies worked historically was there were very clear lines of demarcation between the FDA, the EPA, the CDC. They all worked in their own lanes and they all kept to themselves. And if they had to work together, they did so reluctantly, and usually nobody was happy at the end of it. One of the things that we're working on is getting those organizations working together, and I'll give you some quick examples of that. PPE, one of the first things that was distinguished was we didn't have enough, and one of the things we had to do was how can you recertify PPE gear? So NIOSH came to the table and said, first of all, there is no standard for doing that. So the EPA came to the table and started looking at different solutions, and the CDC was basically the one accountable for clearing it. They spent about a month and a half designing the criteria for disinfecting and sanitizing personal protective equipment for reuse. And then when they finished and all of that work and all that time and all that energy, they handed it out to the nurses and they wouldn't wear it because they smelled bad. So none of it made any difference. And this is the kind of thing that as we try to respond to COVID, we're discovering, which is we keep trying to respond to the issues at hand, and the solutions we're coming up with aren't having the impact that we hope they will. So that leads to the next thing, which is, does the CDC really know what's best for all? And the answer is no, because COVID as a contagion really crosses a lot of different agencies. And all you have to do is look at the meatpacking plants to understand that. So COVID was spreading rapidly in the meatpacking plants. Was that an FDA issue? Was that a National Institute of Health issue? Was that a CDC issue? Well, they all had to come to the table because they all dealt with different aspects of criteria for that. And that's one of the things that I think got really well articulated through this entire conversation, is that as you're looking at your practice and you're looking at how to implement protocols that are going to keep you, your staff, and your patients safe, there is no one place to look, and there is no one place to look and know what it's going to look like in a week, because it's constantly changing. And literally the best you can do is implement the practices that are being used today and are being told. And even though we know that the CDC says follow sanitation protocols, we really don't have protocols for sanitizing an airborne disease. So what are you supposed to do there? And so the mistakes I would say practices are making are, if you're looking for the answer, it is not out there, because this is a novel virus. We've never had to deal with this. Not that we didn't have opportunities to look at it in advance in a preparedness way, but the fact is human beings are really good at preparing for the last disaster, not the next one. So today, where should you turn for guidance? It is literally best practices, and what those are as it relates to an airborne virus is one of the reasons that we at IBEC have created a summit. And if you go to the next slide, Jeff, we created a nonprofit, and our mission is to provide a scientific foundation for healthy congregation in a clean space. And we're having a Clean 2020 summit because right now it's not about giving the right answer, it's about finding the right questions. And we've gathered together the CDC, the EPA, the FDA, NIST, all of the agencies that we trust to do the research and standardize the efficacy so that policies and procedures can actually get created. That's the purpose of the summit. And it's really to engage everything from the science side that connects to the industrial application side, so it can get out to the business and consumer side. And it's way too early to start talking about fixing the right policy and procedure program. And the perfect analogy I have is, if in what I did in implementing programs that could guarantee Joint Commission accreditation was like plating a gourmet dinner. And I would plate it and I would serve it to the customer, and they would be looking at this beautiful dinner. And so when I talked to Janie, who was on 2 White House administrations, she said that's a great analogy, and the problem is the kitchen's broken. So we can't even produce reliable food for you to plate to give to a consumer. So it's a little early in the conversation for responding to COVID to sit down and say, here's the perfect compliance program, we're all set to go. And then if you go to the next slide, Jeff, so I invite everybody to the Clean 2020 Summit, and I am certainly available via my cell to answer any questions. But really quick, I really don't have the time to go into each and every one of these things. But the fact is that there is going to have to be a new definition of what clean is, because the standard from being sterilized to being swept clean is changing, and we're going to have to figure out ways to increase the hygienic quality of a space and decrease the cost to get it there. And we are creating that joint collaboration between federal agencies so that we can get the research done and create criteria for clearance standards based on the level of cleanliness that's needed in a room. And the good news is, as people in healthcare, we have literally designed our buildings so that they can support best practices to maintain clean spaces. And now imagine that having to be translated to a hotel lobby, where if it looked clean, it was clean. Well, we in healthcare live at a different level of that. And then as it applies specifically to dentistry, I can tell you I've spent hours and hours on the phone addressing the aerosolization of the virus and the dangers of being in a room, especially with some of the ultrasonic cleaning techniques that are going on. And there is a lot of technology that's coming down the pike, but it's not there now. And the standards for policies and procedures for safe spaces in the dental industry is not up to scratch. And that's a fundamental place that has to be addressed as we move forward to find solutions. And the good news is that from everything I know about having acquired medical equipment for years, the industries that make PPE have been in full gear manufacturing. I have been told repeatedly that we are 3 to 4 months away from being able to pick up NIOSH approved N95 equipment, and the standards for new research to address things like the risks for dental workers is beginning to be designed, and that the one of the biggest hurdles is overcoming that politicalization of the issue, which somebody already mentioned. Next year it'll be a lot easier because we won't be in a political landscape like we are this year. I could not agree with that more. And then finally, I'm so glad all of you are on the phone, because the only way this is going to get resolved is for people to be engaged in it. Quite frankly, I think it's the only conversation worth having right now, because until we can all feel safe going back into the built space, we're going to have a hard time rebooting an economy or even seeing our loved ones. So it quite frankly is the only conversation worth having. And again, I am perfectly available. My cell phone's right up there on the last slide, and I look forward to any questions you may have. Thanks.
Great. Just phenomenal information, Tony. Appreciate it. So with that, we were only about 12 minutes over time with seven panelists, which I think is great. So at this point, we're going to go into the Q&A. I asked for right now that it's one question per attendee with a 5-minute total maximum interaction time, just to make sure we get through as many questions as possible. And then if your question that was not asked, or it was asked but maybe not answered properly, then we're going to have contact details for myself so you can send it on and ask for that. So at this point, Connie, do you have some questions that were typed in to the side notes?
So first of all, before we get into the question part, Ginger and probably others are asking if you're going to send out to DEC for the program.
Yes, and I got that information. There will be a replay, and we'll have the link for that, and there will be the deck. So I will have my contact information on the last slide for everyone to get to send me the email with what they need. Yep.
Perfect. I have a question for Wendy Sellers. Wendy, there was a lot of information given very quickly. And if you could go back to the conversation about the Family First coronavirus response, under Section 56, it is pretty clear about who the healthcare providers are. Could you talk for 1 minute about how they can opt out to pay for coverage? That was just a real quick conversation.
Sure. Let me put this back in. Okay, so just being a healthcare provider, if you go on to the Families First Coronavirus Response Act website, which is a Department of Labor, basically, if you're a healthcare provider, they have listed what that means, and you do not have to pay. You could just opt out. You don't have to do anything. So there's nothing you have to do. You say, I'm a healthcare provider. We don't have to pay this time off. if one of my employees is infected or children or whatever. Now, I have healthcare clients that are wanting to offer it, but not wanting to offer all 6 reasons for the FFCRA, which number 6 hasn't even been defined yet. So it is number 56 on the DOL website, basically says you can pick and choose, okay, we're only going to cover the employee that is sick with COVID, but we're not going to cover if they have to take care of their family. Does that make sense?
Yes, that is actually how I read it too. I just wasn't sure. So thank you for that. Are there any other questions for our panelists at this time?
Yes, I have a question. This is Jay Prakash.
Yes, sir.
I have a question from Wendy Sellers again. This is regarding, if an employee is tested positive, isn't it a requirement for other employees to be tested? And also I find that first of all, it's hard to find a testing place, rapid testing place, and then when you go on, even if they go and get tested, it takes 7 to 10 days to get the results. So does that mean we have to quarantine all the employees and pay them their salary and keep the office closed?
That's a very good question. And so there's no clarity on the answer to this. So what I say is, you need, I'm always saying do the most, but not everybody agrees with me there, right? Because you'd have to close down your business, but do the most to keep everybody protected, and then be consistent. There are no mandates by the CDC. There are no mandates by the CDC, period, for employers. But they're all recommendations, and all our lawyers on the phone here will tell you, take them as mandates, because otherwise there will be lawsuits and people will be sick, and then your customers will be sick as well. So whatever you do, you just have to be consistent. Do you have to get everybody tested because one other person is in the middle of getting tested? No, but I would definitely make sure that, you come up with a policy. All my clients' policies are saying, as of X date, this is subject to change. Connie noted in the chat box that there's 24-hour testing response sites, like the lab in Lake Nona. And there are other sites that I found that many of my customers have. If you bring somebody on site to test all your employees, a lot of those are either immediate or within 24 hours. But there's a cost to that too. So I don't have a straight out answer for you. If you want to take my information from the slides and send me an email or give me a call, I'd be more than happy to help you out on a one-on-one basis.
Oh, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Hi, this is Celia. Can I jump in and ask a question?
Yes. Hey, Celia. Yeah, for sure.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I will contribute too that I spoke with Centricare this morning on that COVID testing question for someone else, and they are doing rapid testing, and they file with the individual's insurance, or it's $129, and they tell me the results are obtained in 15 minutes. But my question is very simple. The word furlough has come up real quickly with this COVID and employment, but what is the difference between laying someone off, furloughing someone? I mean, I know termination is termination, but what is a temporary layoff versus furlough?
I don't know if any of the lawyers want to jump in on this, but I'll give you my 2 cents. In the private industry, furlough has no definition. It's really a definition in the government industry, so the public employers. So it's pretty much what I have found is, generally speaking, most people that are using the word furlough is usually 8 weeks or less. But again, there's no legal definition in the private industry. I find that people use the word furlough that says, this is temporary, we're bringing you back. Additionally, usually with the furlough, you keep their benefits going. So you keep their insurance running, whether you're paying for it, whether they're paying for it. You keep everything running. You keep their date of hire, their time with the company. If it's a layoff, that means typically means either a permanent layoff, like we don't have work and we're probably not bringing you back, or a temporary layoff, but we don't know when or if we're bringing you back because of the economy. So is any of the lawyers on the phone want to jump in on that?
Greg, are you there?
I am here. Wendy, I defer to you, but I'm not a employment lawyer, but I've talked to some employment folks to try to get the distinctions, and I think you've kind of summed it up well. What you find is the term is used in the private industry as just an offer to say, look, we're not going to pay you right now, but we're going to continue your benefits and we're going to see what happens. And so I look at furlough more as a wait and see. We're going to do something for you. We're going to try to keep you on differently than this temporary layoff or permanent layoff. And a lot of people who've quote unquote been temporarily laid off sooner than later find out that they're not coming back, and they have everything discontinued. So it's not necessarily a term of art legally that I understand it, but it is a term that is used to kind of explain the distinction, and frankly might just be used by employers to make people feel better.
Yeah, that's what I find too.
Can employees collect unemployment during furlough?
Can they what? I'm sorry. Can they use unemployment? Yes, absolutely. That's the whole purpose of them doing something, is so that they can go get unemployment. Now they do have to report to the unemployment office, what their situation is, if they're getting any kind of money, not benefits, but any kind of money. They have to report that too, and then their amount will be reduced.
Good questions. So I'm sure there's got to be more questions out there. There's a lot of information that we went over. Please don't be shy.
I have a question. When is this going to end?
Yeah, Tony, do you have that magical answer?
No, Tony's who I defer to.
What about, and I've got some questions on the telemedicine. So, and if Debbie's on, or Celia, or someone to answer, around reimbursements, what is that looking like? Obviously right now, but what are your thoughts on in the future around telemedicine reimbursements? Because I know there's some concerns. It's great. It's going to carry on, but what might be the reduction once, and what would be the trigger in order for that to be reduced potentially, if it will be, which most likely it will be?
I was going to say, this is Debbie. Okay, go ahead, Celia.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay. I think the biggest concern and the biggest alert is for every practitioner or anybody involved. Keep a very, very close eye on anything that asks for participation information, because, Jeff, you're absolutely right. It is going to continue, but where's the reimbursement going to be? And both from government entities as well as the public insurance companies. Right now, there's some hard and fast guidelines, but when that comes to an end, when it sunsets, it's going to be the Wild West out there. And if the reimbursement is as low as it was predicted to be when they were talking about making it commercial, physicians and providers are going to be very reluctant to do it.
Right.
I would just want to chime in and just add a little, this is Debbie, just a little more information, just looking at it from a
Debbie, can you introduce yourself?
Oh,
just so, yeah,
sure.
Can you introduce yourself just so people know your expertise?
Certainly. My name is Debbie Howard. I work with Stat Healthcare Revenue, but I'm currently practice administrator in one of the local offices there in Orlando. And we actually, as all of this COVID started kind of developing, recognized when the government was going to allow us to do telehealth, because we had looked at telehealth even prior to all of this coming on board. And the reimbursement obviously wasn't there, and we weren't in any type of a rural setting, which were one of the requirements. But I really believe that they've kind of let the cat out of the bag. And unfortunately, I think what's going to happen is you've got, especially in the Central Florida area, you've got such a heavy presence of the Medicare population that have gotten somewhat used to liking the idea that they don't have to come into the facility and don't want to get out on the roads to drive, is what we were finding. So I think what you're going to find is, unfortunately, while they're going to continue to alter the restrictions on having the ramification, the limitations on having a rural setting, I think what you're going to find is that Medicare population is going to want to continue it for convenience. And Medicare is going to say, yes, we will still cover it. Yes, it's a covered benefit. However, they're going to reduce the reimbursement down to probably, half or less of what they're currently paying. And now you've got a situation where it's going to be up to the provider to say, the patient's now saying, well, yes, Medicare's telling us they're still going to pay for it, but we're in a position where we're not willing to do it because it's going to be at a loss. Right. So then we become the bad guy because we're not willing to continue to do that when we've done it. But I can tell you that right now in this environment, based on the current reimbursement qualification, where they're at now, we've been very, very successful at having telehealth through this, and it's actually been what's been the saving grace for our practice to ensure that we've been able to continue to see patients in a timely manner. So without telehealth, I can tell you without a doubt, many of the primaries aren't going to be able to survive this. So I think it's vital to the primaries. If they're not currently utilizing telehealth, they really need to look at how can they do it.
Yeah, good points. One thing I want to bring up.
Jeff,
go ahead.
Can I add one comment to what Debbie just said?
Yes.
One of the words she used was convenience, and if Medicare follows suit, they don't do anything for the convenience of their beneficiaries. I mean, there's so much certification has to be done for necessary equipment and supplies that, the potential is there that they may require certification that it's necessary, that the patient do telehealth or a virtual visit versus essential.
One thing I wanted to bring up, though, in this space, and we can move on to another topic, was I have actually a dental client that was very surprised and excited on how they were using teledentistry, which is basically the same concept, but they were using it through the website and really trying to engage the patient. That would eventually lead to the patient coming in and additional procedures that are needed, but at least to engage with their practice, because they're the only one that had it set up. So in the end, are they going to get reimbursed much, if anything, for the initially? No, but in the end, they are, because the patient is going to be coming into their practice. So that's what they're finding in the success of saying telemedicine, teledentistry, however you want to title it. Same idea. So I think what we need to look at in that space is not the fact of, is this one thing one time going to make us money, and if so, how much? But in the end, with the specific patient and on average, is it going to generate face-to-face contacts where we're going to need to see the patient, and where we can get through the reimbursements where maybe we wouldn't have got it if we wouldn't have had this service available to patients. So something to think about. I'm sure there's got to be other questions out there.
Wanted to add a comment about the future of telehealth.
Yeah.
Hi, folks. I'm Ginger Kelly with the NorCal Group, and my background is risk management right now after a number of years as a practice administrator. And I recently participated in the MGMA ACMPE telehealth certificate program. which I recommend to anybody who's really going to be engaging in this service. So a plug for MGMA on that. But I also wanted to say that the entire platform that's being used, a lot of people ramped up very quickly using whatever they had available because the Office of Civil Rights relaxed their enforcement of HIPAA. There are no, and Greg, correct me if I'm mistaken or anybody else, there are no actual waivers associated with security and privacy on this. They instead agreed to not engage in their normal enforcement activities as long as a public health emergency existed. So when that public health emergency ceases to exist, those same providers will be expected to be providing these services with completely HIPAA compliant platforms. So if anybody's trying to ramp up during this time and they have this latitude to do things in an easier, quicker, less expensive way, they need to be looking at prospectively what they're going to use going forward if they want to make this a permanent service.
Thank you. That's great information. So, and again, showing that it doesn't have to be a question, but just making comments and adding value about ways that people should think about or things that they should consider doing. What other questions would anyone else have out there? No. Okay. One thing I would like to point out again is something else around what Tony's brought up is for PPE and looking out after your practice to say what should you be doing. Again, that's a work in progress and best to follow as far as the national organizations and what guidance you're getting there. I know there's conflict between what the government is saying and what the national organizations are wanting at times, which just has to work out over time, unfortunately. One thing I want to that's related to that is going back to the marketing piece is to talk about what happens in social media, which is happening a lot. We're seeing come up a lot when patients or even sometimes, unfortunately, employees say, I'm concerned about my workplace, or I think that, I noticed somebody at the practice didn't wear a mask, to make sure you can have the proper procedures in place, but if no one's monitoring what is in place to make sure that, the procedures are being followed, to maintain proper PPE, then you're going to be at risk. And the one that has to care a lot is actually obviously the practice owner, and also the staff, because if it impacts the practice owner, impacts the practice, and potentially impacts your position at the practice. So there was a client of mine, just as an example, that had everything in place. The monitoring was not in place, the enforcement, and people didn't have masks on all the time and shared the same telephone, and 3 in the practice were infected. So from there, you can imagine the ramifications that happened to the practice, or potentially could happen, especially as the legal side of things and the insurance side of things progress around, what's covered, what's not covered, what's suable, what's not suable, what's able to be proven, and those sort of things. Melissa, can you kind of touch on that as far as to say reputation management and some things you're seeing around that part of it?
Yes, actually, we have a program that puts all of your reviews in one place at one time so that you can review them. You can actually respond to them directly from the app. You have to be looking at your reputation daily, or make sure that you're getting alerts if somebody does leave you a review, because they can leave it on so many different sites, and you have to respond. One of the ways that Google ranks you right now is if you're responding to your reviews, especially if it's negative, because a lot of times if you respond to a negative review, it's enough to make them want to take it down. And the person who wrote it is the only person who could take down the review. So anything that you write on there is going to be public. You need to apologize first and then try to say, I'm here, I want to help you fix the problem, and just deal with it immediately. Do not ignore it. Also, on the social media piece, there are a lot of settings and securities in place to where you can make it where anyone who leaves a comment, the comment has to be approved before it will show up on your page. And especially in healthcare, when you know you can't make everyone happy, it's good to put these types of securities in place. That way you're not doing damage control. You're preventing the damage from happening in the first place.
Great points. And that's, unfortunately, I actually have seen some practices that were devastated enough that they no longer exist. I mean, it's not real common right now, but I would imagine as time moves on, there unfortunately will be more cases that will happen, because once it gets out on social media, obviously if it's not monitored, it can explode, right? And no one wants that.
And Jeffrey, one more thing. If some of you are saying, well, I don't post on social media, or I'm not on those review sites, it doesn't have to be you personally who claim these listing sites where they can leave reviews. People can claim the site for you just so that they can leave you a negative review. So if you just think if you don't participate, nothing's going to happen to you, that's not the way it works anymore. Someone can claim your Google page and then leave you a negative review, and then after that it just rolls downhill. You just have to monitor it. You can't ignore it. You can't say, well, I'm just not going to do reviews, because people can do them anyway, and people can talk about you online anyway on different group sites and different pages, even if you don't have your own. You have to be very careful and diligent in everything that you do online nowadays.
A couple of things I want to point out that's pretty exciting too, related to the topic. Our society partners have actually done a great job in coming together, be it medical, be it dental, and offering a valuable program to their members of being able to order supplies for getting proper PPE in place. So I just want to commend them on coming together and doing a great job in doing that. So think about that. If you're part of a local society here in Central Florida, make sure to contact them and ask if they're participating and get involved, because not only to say get access, but obviously as a combined buyers group to say it's going to be typically should be at a better cost. So just another point. And if you're part of a society that's maybe not doing it, definitely obviously should be something I feel that they should consider, because it makes all kinds of sense to do it. Okay.
Yeah, this is Bobby. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay, Bobby. Go ahead.
Jeff, and Connie, you may be better to answer this too, but one of the two of you, if a practice wanted to take out a loan to expand, do another practice, buy a building, something like that, and they got PPP, how would that affect them? I ran into this last month and just wanted to get your take on that, because I think a lot of people don't realize that the PPP loans are through the same group that does SBA loans. Right.
So good question. So what we look at in again, in banks such as ourselves, we have the specialty lending for, buy and buyout startups, expansions, and banks in general have been, getting better, but kind of hesitant in lending, number one. And so that the access to working capital is a big deal right now. So that not just with, say, PNC Bank, but with every bank to say, we want to make sure, number one, are we going to lend? Are we just going to lend to our current clients? Or are we going to lend to non-clients? And what criteria are we looking for? In most cases, the banks are wanting to make sure, does the practice have access to working capital, be it money in the accounts, whether it's from PPP, whether it's from to say a line of credit or personal or business balances, and looking at up to say 6 months, just because if shutdown happens again, what's your plan B, right? And so to us, when somebody gets a PPP loan or any EIDL or whatever, that's great because it just helps to show that they got additional working capital, so they have the backup needed to make sure that they get through. I mean, that's our kind of our view, which makes sense to say, what's your backup plan? Do you have access to working capital? If things shut down, what is your plan B? And the unfortunate part of it is if that happens, there's a lot of practices that don't have that plan B. Okay. There's going to be more on the medical side around to say telemedicine and being able to still handle procedures that are doing remotely as far as to say the visits and reimbursements, but there's still the component of the in-person visits that they need reimbursements for. So that impacts to say how we view things as far as saying when I say we, I mean banks in general. But again, and I know I went on some related tangents, but it's all the point of access to working capital, making sure a practice has it. Look at your average monthly expenses. Okay, look at having at least 6 months, if not more, in backup. Whether it be from the different financings that's available, access to a line of credit, as well as obviously personal and business liquidity in the account. Does that help, Bob?
It does. I guess the one thing I wanted to hit on again is a lot of people just don't realize that if they filed for a PPP loan, that could affect their ability to get an SBA loan. Because that's part of the PPP process. You had to submit that you were financially impacted, correct?
Right, but the fact of the matter is PPP is SBA, okay?
Right.
So it is an SBA loan. It acts like a 7A loan program because that's where they had to fit it in. And I'm talking more conventional because in healthcare financing, typically, as far as to say like a practice loan, that happens more so as far as conventional financing. Now, if it's if it's a real estate loan, then it can be an SBA loan. Okay, that's where then it becomes a 7A or it becomes a 504. Then it kind of depends on to say, and I haven't seen this come up, and it's a good question to say, is this going to impact my ability to get financing at doing an SBA 7A or 504 because I got a PPP loan? I have not seen this come up to be an issue as of yet. And then maybe, Scott or Peter could chime in and see if they've heard anything around that as well. Peter or Scott?
Sorry, I was taking myself off mute. I haven't heard any issues. And granted, I know this is so new, but my clients that have applied for financing on the real estate side, having a PPP or an EIDL hasn't caused an issue.
Right.
Yeah, this is Scott. I agree. I have not heard of too many issues, although I will caution people with the PPP. I have some clients that have tax-exempt debt, like bonds. So we've tried to caution them to make sure, if they've gotten a PPP loan, that they've worked with their bankers to make sure that it's a permitted indebtedness. So that's just kind of another thing to consider.
Right. The other thing too is on the EIDL loans, they do take a lien typically on the assets of the practice for, I believe it's loan amounts above the 150 and up. And so we've had instances where the lien all of a sudden shows up, and now we've got to get a subordination from SBA, go through the process. So far, we haven't had an issue, but on our end, that's really been the only concern around these type of specialty loans.
Hey, Bobby, on that one instance that you did have, that from what I'm hearing, may have been impacted, you may want to drive them back to their CPA for guidance, because they may want to apply after the 8-week window. Because if you think about it, the portal's going to open, which right now we believe is going to be August 10th. But of course, I'm not an SBA representative and I'm not advising on that. But everybody in America that owns a business that took PPP funding is going to be eligible to try to submit an application in there unless they elect for the later time frame. So it's going to take weeks to get a response back for the forgiveness part. So it may be that your client needs to get either additional advice, or maybe that request was just a little premature and needs to go through the forgiveness process. I'm not sure about the individual details that you're talking about, but I would at least refer them back to their CPA for some guidance there.
We did get it worked out, but we did run into a hurdle because of that, and it was just something that we had to. It wasn't something that we expected, and it was a little unforeseen. So again, just making sure that everybody's aware of it. So if it does come up and happen to somebody else, they're aware. That's all.
No, that's great. No, it's perfect that you bring up something as a potential concern like that. So.
Hey, Jeff,
Absolutely.
I do have a question too. If there are probably not so much Sharon, because I haven't seen it with the dental world, she may say differently, but if there are any society administrators on the phone today, I have gotten several letters from practitioners who are changing locations and joining another practice. And I wondered if that was really prevalent right now, if we're going to see a lot of mergers and acquisitions. What are the thoughts there?
Greg, Scott, Peter, are you seeing transitions like this more so now than previously from the medical or dental side?
This is Greg. When you say, am I seeing more transitions? What I haven't seen is a reduction. There's a lot of transactional work that's gone on. It hasn't slowed down after the first couple of things about it. There's definitely been some mergers and some sales and people coming into dental practices. I'm involved with some of those, and there's still plenty of transactional work going on in healthcare with physician providers, either in joint ventures or with hospitals, or doing things with surgery centers or what have you.
This is Peter. I'll comment. We haven't seen it slow down. We've seen it picked up a little bit in the dental space. One of the issues that is coming up right now is that deals that were safe to finance pre-COVID may not be safe after COVID. Also, there is a slowdown on startup financing, which is pushing more dentists in this case to purchasing practices and going through that route. So we're not necessarily seeing a slowdown. There certainly is demand on both the sell and the buy side. It's a matter of trying to get the deal financed and what a particular bank wants to look at to approve the deal.
Right. Are you seeing more buy-ins too, Peter, right now?
A few, but what's happened is anyone who was a buy-in pre-COVID is turning into a. Sorry, there's an echo. Anybody that was a buy-in is sometimes turning into a buy-out.
Right, and it's an interim transitional type of transaction, right? So.
Well, and for example, a client, an associate has an agreement to buy in over 4 years. Now it's turning into, can we get the deal closed by September 30th? So, those kind of things are out there, but there's much more emphasis on succession planning than there was before COVID.
Right, and that's why I'm seeing too is a lot more practitioners open to discussion around putting a plan together and getting it implemented than previously. Scott, are you seeing the same things in the medical side?
Absolutely. I don't think we've seen really a slowdown in deals. We've certainly seen some deals in process modified because of COVID, but the volume itself hasn't changed a whole lot, which is good, I guess. But again, we've seen some deals get tweaked, certainly as both Greg and Peter have mentioned.
Yeah, Jeff, this is Bobby. I'd say the same thing. I mean, I signed 2 new leases this week, and we got an LOI yesterday for a third. So, I mean, I haven't seen much of a slowdown either. There was certainly for a while there, but it's picked back up now.
Yeah, Bobby, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is Bobby Bridges with B3 Commercial Advisors. I'm the commercial real estate advisor of the group. So, handle medical, commercial real estate, leasing, investment sales, really across the board.
Yeah. That way, I just want people so they know as far as your background and
Sure,
kind
of course.
what perspective you're speaking on. So that helps. Appreciate it. So Bobby, you seeing what do you? And then it's great you speak up. So what are you seeing overall as far as real estate values as purchases? Are there more? Is it a buyer's market? Is it a seller's market? Where are values at? Could you kind of touch on that real quick?
To be honest, it hasn't changed drastically as of yet. Retail's been hurt pretty bad. That doesn't affect the medical side of things all that much because, and I think you're going to see a lot of defaults from restaurants and, there'll certainly be some defaults on the office building side as well, which could create some opportunities for medical of people that, aren't specific and don't have to be in a medical office building. It'll certainly create some opportunities in retail too. We've seen more medical go into retail just because of the foot traffic that they're able to get and the visibility. The biggest issue with that is the build out is usually more expensive in that type of an environment because those retail spaces aren't set up, to be a medical space. So it costs a little bit more to build out on the front end. But I would say right now the values haven't changed drastically as of yet. I do think that, when some of this funding runs out, that it's going to vet out the people that will be able to make it through or not, because I think some people have been able to hang on through PPP loans or whatnot. And, we own almost 1 million, my company that I work for owns almost 1 million square feet of commercial real estate in Central Florida. And, we've seen a bit of everything. There's certainly some people that are struggling that it doesn't matter how much more funding they get. I don't know that they'll make it out of it, but then we've seen a lot of people that have been able to fight through this and make it work. And then there's other industries that just haven't been affected at all, because of the shutdown. So I'd say that's a general overview, but on the medical side, I don't think there's been a drastic change as of yet, because again, people are still going to see doctors and whatnot when they get sick. And so it hasn't affected the value because you're not seeing payments be missed from medical professionals for the most part.
Right. Great. I appreciate that. Well, we're at the time. And again, thank you all for the questions. Hopefully you all found this interactive and beneficial above all things. But this is what our group does. Healthcare Circle of Excellence is a group of healthcare business professionals who are known in Central Florida for what they do and how well they do it within the medical and or dental community. And we have these meetings typically once a month where we come together, educate each other, and then look at how can we help each other, help each other's clients. And it's working out well. What I wanted to do, because of so many questions coming up with all of our clients around getting clarity and some guidance and support, is have the open forum as we did today. If you found value in it and like to do it again, tell me. If you think there's format needs to change or we need to consider a different topic, tell me. This is my information on this screenshot. For you on the only listening in on your phones, my email address where you can, again, whatever you have as questions, formats, you like it, you don't like it, give me slides, whatever. Email me at Jeffrey, JEFFREY .Holt, HOLT at PNC, Paul Nancy Charlie, PNC.com. and I will respond. I will collect all the questions. I'll do my best to get the answers back to each one of you, as well as copies of the presentation in a PDF format. And we have recorded this. I want to thank Clay, our dental IT expert, for doing that. So Clay did record the session so that we can review the slides that way as well as the overall event. And I ask, please share it with those that were unable to attend. I've got many that are on the list that want the link, and we're going to share it with them. So at this point, again, thank you all for your interaction. We hope this was beneficial enough that we get enough requests to do it again, and have a great weekend.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Great presentation. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you, everybody.